What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. And this is a show so good, it happens every week, and it's called Great Scott. It's your true crime Phil with our best guests. America's most respected detective, Fil Waters. He spent decades in law enforcement, becoming an expert at obtaining criminal confessions, spending 23 years as a homicide detective in the Houston PD. He investigated more than 400 homicide cases. He is also a Marine. He's also the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations. He also starred in a show called The Interrogator. And then you've got Agent Scott Duffey, who every week comes to us with a new microphone or headset or combination, and this is the snazziest so far. And he is the director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. Scott is a retired FBI agent out of Delaware. He worked gangs, bank robberies, the fugitive task force, all the cool stuff, the tough stuff, the hard stuff. And before that, 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. And we've got Asterisk saying, hey, what's up, STS Nation? Of course, you can't help but notice Phil's new Hawaiian shirt. Phil, those are guitars.
They
Tell
are.
us about it. When did you get that?
Our trip to Hawaii, our regular trip that year, my son was big into playing guitars, and the specialty shirt at Hilo Hattie's Aloha shirt was guitars. So in his honor, I bought my Guitar Aloha shirt that has Telecasters on it, Les Pauls on it. It's got a variety of guitars on it.
If Phil wasn't cool enough already as the real life Magnum PI, we found out that his son Shane is a virtuoso on the guitar, can play behind his head. It runs in the family. Love STS Nation Fridays, followed by Andy's School. Another reason to enjoy Fridays. Joel, Scott, and Phil get into the real bones of these cases that highlight criminals' minds, behaviors. Looking forward to today's show. Now, I know that Phil is a Marine. Scott, did you serve in the military?
I did not.
You did not. So
well, my son is my son is a Marine as well.
A Marine. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this is all over the news, and we're going to get to Lori Vallow Daybell and the other and the evildoer, which there's virtually no news about this week. But Phil, to you, a Massachusetts Air National Guard member emerged as a main person of interest in the disclosure of highly classified military documents on the Ukraine war. They had a lot of people like Scott surrounding his house yesterday and took him into custody without incident. That's according to the U.S. Attorney General. The guardsman, who specializes in intelligence, led an online chat group where the documents were posted. He was identified as 21-year-old Jack Teixeira. They surrounded his Massachusetts home. He came out wearing a T-shirt and shorts. What do you make of this? This is big news all over the telly. You're a law enforcement guy. You've got a 21-year-old, basically a kid, who somehow has very highly classified secret information related to the war going on in Ukraine right now. He let it out or released it on, I believe, Discord, which is a thing the kids use to chat. And he's now in custody and might spend a lot of time behind bars. Your thoughts on this?
Well, my big picture view of this is that this is a symptom of a bigger problem with our military as a result of the ridiculous policies that have been implemented over the last 3 years in our military and affecting the Pentagon and everywhere else. So I think this is just a symptom of a much bigger problem. And in terms of the up close picture of this thing, given the documents that I've seen that he released that compromised us with China and with Russia and put people's lives in danger, there are two punishments in this, and one is life in prison and the other one is the death penalty. And I'm sorry, I'm an old school guy. Somebody that does this, that subverts the security of the United States of America and compromises our military operations and compromises people's lives that are serving, this guy deserves the death penalty.
And this is why I asked Fil Waters. He's a Marine. When you serve in that capacity, and his son is serving or served, is he still in the Marines, Phil?
No, he went to Iraq, Afghanistan. He was a human intel officer, and he got out after 8 years. He was a captain, and now he's a Foreign Service officer for the State Department.
Oh, anyway, when you go through all that, and your son goes through all that, you can have a take on this, and that is why I'm asking Phil. But Scott served in a different capacity, and Scott, they say that this leak may have started on a site called Discord. It's a social media platform popular with online gamers. Brigadier General Pat Ryder came out and said that the leak was, quote unquote, a deliberate criminal act, and did not comment further. In your mind, how serious a crime is this, especially against the United States of America?
Very serious. So you are only as good as your weakest link. And so here's a very weak link. So you spend a lot of money on artillery and weaponry and educating and training, putting our men and women in all parts of the world in some very, very dangerous arenas. And that includes people who will never know by name. Human sources are one of the biggest ways we have of intel, from military to law enforcement. This is how we gather information, and this is how we try to continue to tamp down unforeseen, and people and the public may never see some of the threats that are out there because they've been stopped by good human intelligence. So you have an individual, 21 years old. That's young. That's my oldest son, and a National Guardsman, and it's just unfortunate. But yet at the same time, just like Phil, where are you spending the time and resources, and have you forgotten about the everyday ground troops who if they can simply gather some of the most secret material and then put it out on the airwaves, it's very sad. But we are only as good as our weakest link.
And this right here, this book was written by Mark Polymeropoulos, who I've known since second grade, and he was one of the highest ranking CIA officers. He was a covert officer, half Jewish kid, half Greek kid. He was recruited by the CIA out of Cornell University. They taught him to speak fluent Arabic, and he lived life for some time as a member of the Taliban. And when he retired, he was in charge of over 3,000 CIA officers. So I know he would not be pleased about this news. So we move on. We've got Elf here from Albuquerque. Hello, Elf. We've got Catherine. Happy Aloha Friday from Hawaii with coffee and the guys. We have Tali. Hello from Israel. Always the best Fridays with STS. Fil and Scott. Hello from London. The international crew flows in on Friday, and people are saying they're jealous of Catherine, and others are saying this 21-year-old kid is a freaking nut job. It's a good way to describe him. Hi from southeastern Idaho. Hi from Staffordshire.
Well, I don't know. Carrie might be talking about me.
That could be true. Please let us know. Please clarify that. And then we've got LA, Los Angeles. So last week, guys, I brought you the story of the Cash App executive, Bob Lee. He was stabbed outside a fairly well-to-do condo in a well-to-do neighborhood. Well, San Francisco police made an arrest. They arrested a gentleman named Nima Momeni in connection to the murder of Cash App founder Bob Lee. The chief announced this during a news conference on Thursday, and the chief described the suspect in custody as a 38-year-old man from Emeryville, California, and said that the two, that Momeni and Lee, knew one another, but would not provide any further details about their connection. Phil, does it surprise you that these two knew each other?
No.
And why are they? Tell me what's going on from the PD side of things right now. How come they are staying very tight-lipped, not saying anything beyond the fact that they knew each other?
Well, my sense would be, when we talked about this last week, my first question is why is he there at that place at 2:30 or whenever this happened in the morning? And who's he with? So now that question has been answered. And I would imagine that there's going to be some kind of background in this between these two guys that may be a little nefarious, a little embarrassing, and so forth and so on. I don't know that. I'm just
as in, like, it could have been romantic, or
trying to answer your question right. So
Yeah.
there's obviously something going on here between these guys.
Could it be that maybe this guy Bob Lee didn't hire him or fired him at one point? Something along it could be.
They've got something going on. And I think the suspect is he's a techie guy too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So they're all from the same world. We don't know the extent of the relationship, and it could be all those things you just said, Joel. I mean, it could be business, it could be just a friendship, it could be more than that, romantic, it could be whatever it is, but something occurred. So remember, murders occur for one of three reasons: sex, drugs, or money. And when this is all fleshed out, it's going to be one of those reasons, or maybe a combination thereof. So I would just assume, given where it occurred, that they're trying to be a little cautious about releasing a bunch of stuff now because of how it might reflect on families and so forth and so on. I don't know. I'm just saying that that's what it may appear to be. I guess
so when you have something like this in Houston, do you guys like huddle together and say we can release this, but let's not release this? And are there reasons for that? Is it like you just said they might not want to upset the family? Is it for that reason, or is it because of an investigative reason that they don't want to release information? Maybe there could be someone else tied to the case. Who knows? I don't know.
It's kind of two-pronged. I mean, when we did have a scene that was maybe a higher profile than just the normal homicide, if that's such a term, that's kind of an oxymoron, I guess, right? So we would talk about what do we need to release that will give the public the information about what happened. But then, are there certain things? There were several times where there were some things that we were not going to release at the time because we were trying to consider the families involved, the people involved, and it just wasn't at that point necessary to add what might be termed as salacious details just to feed the curiosity of the public about what this and that and this, that, because eventually it's going to come out at some point in time, but we want to try to control the narrative a little bit to keep it from being embarrassing on the front end. And that has nothing to do with politics or anything. It's just a matter of being considerate about the people involved. So Yes, to answer your question, there were times where we had to make some considerations about what we were going to releasing, and then there may be something to do with the investigation itself. So it may be two tiered, but I don't find it strange that they're taking this approach, at least at this point, to explain the relationship.
And STS Nation, please don't forget, send in questions. You can ask Fil and Scott about literally anything. Lorna says, love Phil's Hawaiian shirt, followed by Telecaster. Yes, indeed, from Marking Time. Scott, to you. The California Secretary of State records indicate that Momeni, the suspect, has been the owner of an IT business, which, according to its website, not his, but the website from the state, provides services like technical support. He was taken again into custody without incident. He was booked on one charge of murder. Same question to you. Are you surprised these two guys knew each other? And how would the FBI handle higher profile cases in terms of the dissemination of information, which rhymes? I'm a poet. I don't even know it.
Well, for at least to handle to answer the latter part, the FBI is always never going to discuss its cases, right? It's going to be a no comment, and that's often frustrating to a feed me information now type of society. But the FBI is always going to stand by its policy with regards to limited information and neither confirm nor deny. With regards to two people knowing each other, it doesn't surprise me. Just like Fil said, there's usually one of three reasons or a combination of those reasons. And so if the early reports are it's because San Francisco is off the hook with violence and random encounters of criminal activity, that it was somebody just off the street and happened to take down a very wealthy techie CEO. So obviously that didn't flush out, but that was a possibility, right? And so now we have a little bit more information. My take is, now that you have the victim who had, from what I gather, reading reports, banging on doors, shouting for help, even calling 911, is it possible that this individual had named the suspect, hey, this individual is the one that stabbed me? So it's possible the information is recorded somewhere or shouted out, as opposed to why would a victim, especially if that victim knows he's bleeding out and coming to an end, that he wouldn't name his attacker if he knew his attacker. So it'd be a couple interesting. But you're talking about two major CEOs, one taking out the other, and now of course we're left with why over a romantic relationship that gone bad, over some sort of confidentiality break. You stole it's some sort of revenge. But it's going to be one of those, as Fil had explained, regardless of whether somebody, two CEOs, one knowing the other, and as opposed to just somebody off the street.
And Scott brings up a phenomenally excellent point, which is he was bleeding out and he did call 911 as he was inching closer to death. And Fil, he knew this guy. So what are the chances that on that 911 call, he actually revealed the name and said it was this guy, Momemi? Pretty good, don't you think?
Certainly possible. And these guys work together. It would appear that they've been together. They were earlier in the night. So, I mean, it'd be a question. It's probably not a big leap on getting this guy identified. Who is this? Who's the dead guy? Who is he with last? Who is he seen with? What was the schedule that night? Did they meet for dinner? Did they meet for drinks? How did they get together? Who was driving which car? Was it a rental? Did it belong to the suspect? Did it belong to so there's a lot of ways that they got zoned in on this one guy. And so, and if he did say on a 911 or express to someone before he took the exit that this is who it was, then that's all the better. So, Yeah, I don't think it took. That's why they came to arrest this guy so quickly. Obviously, there were some links very early on that sent him in this direction.
And to that point, Phil, because my mind is always curious about your job, your career, and how you did it. Assuming that this guy, Bob Lee, on the 911 call, making the assumption that he said, Momemi did this to me, and now you bring in the suspect, Momemi, how soon in your interrogation or your interview, as you prefer to have it called, do you drop this hammer on him that his name was mentioned?
Well, as I've said before, the first part of that interview is going to be getting to know as quickly as possible about this person you're interviewing. Now, they've already done the research, so we know who we're talking to in terms of the person and his background, so forth and so on. They would have prepared. I mean, I would have prepared for that interview for this. And then the first part of, we've talked about it before, is more of getting to know this person. And then you start easing into the relationship between he and the victim. And those questions are going to be, I mean, if it were me, simply we've done all that stuff. And now here's the question. So please tell me about your relationship with so-and-so. I wouldn't say, do you know so-and-so? Do you know Mr. Lee? I wouldn't phrase it that way, because that's a closed-ended question and it's just too easy for somebody to say no. That would be their gut response. So the question has to be phrased in an open-ended way to allow them a narrative, which is, tell me how long you've known Mr. Lee.
Listen to that, STS Nation. Listen to that slight distinction that makes all the difference in the world.
And then we go on from there, and then of course we're going to get to the point where.
And what if he says to you, Detective Waters, I don't know Bob Lee, but you know that Bob Lee mentioned his name. What do you say then?
Well, I would say, but we have evidence here that you had a relationship with him, and I would have gone back into finding if we have any news articles anywhere that would put them together. They're in the same business. They're in the same area of expertise. So it would be very hard for that person to continue to deny it. I mean, they can, but if I show them evidence that, look, here I've got you at a luncheon with Mr. Lee, last year, or I've got, if I've got evidence, then that's what I would show them and say, so now let's get back to the original question. So tell me how long you've known Mr. Lee, and then we'll get into the depth of that relationship.
Let me digress for a moment, because this circles back to both Fil and Scott. I have 3 kids, soon to be 9, currently 7, soon to be 4. My wife says to me, honey, even though she doesn't call me honey, and says, come look at the van. We have a minivan. That's what I drive. A black on black minivan. So it's almost Fil Waters style. Phil's shaking his head.
No. There's 2 things I never did. I never drove a station wagon or a minivan, ever.
We had lots of arguments. Don't worry. I kind of love it, though. You just pile everyone in. Anyway, my wife says to me, someone keyed our minivan. And I take a closer look, and my wife takes a closer look, and it is a straight line. And at the end of the straight line, it starts to spell my middle daughter's name with a little heart over her I, the letter I in her name, keyed into the side of my door. And I say to my daughter, did you do this? And she says, no, a stranger did it. And I said, well, how would a stranger know your name? And I don't think a grown-up would necessarily put a little heart emoji over the. My point is this, Phil, what was it like for your children growing up in your house when they did something bad? You would interrogate them, and I bet you got an answer quickly.
Well, I'm sure they would tell you now as adults that it was very traumatic for them. But I can tell you that there was very, very few times where they got away with anything. Now, there were some things that I think my son got away with only because it never resurrected itself anywhere else. So you don't know what you don't know. And so then it was years later, I did the same thing with my mom and dad, as I would tell them the stuff, hey, this is stuff I was doing when I was growing up. And they were just looking at me like, you got to be kidding. So my son and I have had that discussion, but the girls, I think I caught them at everything. And so I'm sure they're very affected now and they have their own children now. So I've had 9 grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
And now I am sitting back and I just watch. It's great being granddad, right? Because all I got to do is sit back and love those kids and grandkids and let them do whatever they want to do.
I love it.
And that drives my kids crazy because now I'm watching them handle their kids. And the technique that they're using
is your technique.
They got from dad, not from mom. So it's pretty funny.
And from now on, when my kid keys my minivan, I'm going to FaceTime with Uncle Phil over here. They're going to get to know Uncle Phil.
Well, did she ever confess?
No, she's a stubborn one.
She's stuck with it.
She's a stubborn one. She will never. She's the most stubborn. She will never confess, ever, ever, ever. Carrie does confess that, Phil, sometimes you come along as a little gruff, but your wardrobe suggests otherwise. Followed by, I married a stoner. That's a funny name. I use the same ringtone as Phil for my husband. No wonder he's a stoner. I do love him. It was the closest I could get to a bike bell. So we found out last week that Phil uses it's the bozo, whatever you call it, ringtone.
Bozo horn.
The bozo horn. That's what I was looking for. Scott, how are you disciplining your children? You learn everything on STS Nation on Fridays. Are you tough? You're the voice of reason, but are you tough on your kids when they were growing up? Do you punish them? Do you? Not really.
I wish I could say it was tough. I always came off in my classroom as tough, but no, sometimes they'll, so I had 3 boys, 1 girl, and my girl knew how to probably wrap me around her fingers. So the discipline was dealt out differently, and I think my boys would easily say that. But if I could get back to your daughter, so what was this face-to-face? It wasn't over text, right? Hey, did you do this?
This was face-to-face. First, it was my wife.
And I imagine there wasn't a smile with it, as opposed to, did you do that? I love it. What an amazing piece of art that's permanently on our car.
After a strong line of questioning I thought it was funny. What am I going to do? It's a minivan. I'm going to throw this thing in a junkyard in a couple of years, but it's a cool minivan. It's a Pacifica. It's black on black. They don't make minivans like they used to, Phil. Now they're kind of cool.
Joel,
I've had people compliment my minivan.
Joel, you can justify that all day long. You're never going to convince me. But hey, it looks good on you.
I'm going to send you a picture. And your bozo horn's going to go off when I text it to you. So after a little bit of a tough line of questioning, she actually does what she likes to do. She bursts into tears as to deflect the guilt. But we're over it now. We've moved on. But Ami, hi from Sweden, followed by greetings from Austria. I love Fridays, man. We get the whole globe here on Fridays. Phil, I know you're going to take a little pleasure in this next question. It's the final question related to Bob Lee. So the district attorney for the city of San Francisco, and I believe the mayor even, came out. And when this information was revealed that Bob Lee, this exec, knew the suspect who is now in custody, they blasted Elon Musk and a few other people for putting down their city, saying that it was reckless and irresponsible, and that they assumed incorrect circumstances, because basically Elon Musk said that San Francisco has devolved into a dystopian disaster of a place. And he said, look, there's stabbings, and he pointed to this. And now the DA is saying he was spreading misinformation. Is this ridiculous for the DA to come out and attack Elon Musk for basically blasting San Francisco for deteriorating into something that is pretty awful at the moment?
Well, of course it is. To me, it is unprofessional, and they do what they do specifically in that city, specifically in California, is they take the justice system and they want to intermingle it with politics. It is, and which is happening all over the country with these DAs that are terrible, terrible representatives of the system overall, because they have political agendas. They're not in there doing what's right. So I read what Elon Musk said, and just my own personal view of that is that he wasn't wrong. So you have this mayor in San Francisco, which I believe was a big defund the police proponent. Well, now she's reaping the benefits of that particular philosophy. And they have turned, San Francisco started with Gavin Newsom. If we want to get into politics, started with Gavin Newsom. He was the mayor there. He started the decline of San Francisco. And I've been out there. My daughter lives in San Francisco for years and moved across the bay to Piedmont because San Francisco has turned into a crap hole, literally. So you intermingle all these political philosophies that have been that do not benefit the community at all. They benefit the politicians that are pushing these agendas. So when you have somebody like Elon Musk, who comes out, who's got a huge platform, even before he bought Twitter, and starts making, and who has been a lifelong Democrat, by the way, who starts making observations that are accurate, that are correct, well, those people, the little, bedwetters in San Francisco, they don't like what he's saying because it's pointing out the truth. But for the DA to get in there and start intermingling the political crap, it is fortunate in a way that this was not a random act. Now, San Francisco has, in terms of crime rates and that kind of thing, they've kind of remained steady over the last few years. However, their aggravated robbery rate is has gone up 13%. Their homicide rates are going up. And I was reading a report by the Hoover Institute regarding San Francisco and their crime, that there is evidence that crime in San Francisco is going unreported. That's why it is showing not much of a rise or a fall in the crime rate. So,
well, they're letting them rob CVS's, and
they're shutting. People are shutting down stores and moving out. I mean, this is happening all over the country in all of these cities where you have these DAs that have infiltrated the criminal justice system, and they're all about the criminal, every major city in the country, all their crime rates are going up. And San Francisco is maybe in comparison is not as bad, but it is still bad. And it's still got, the needles on the street, people crapping in the street, the homeless problem. I mean, and I don't mean to get off into all the politics and all that stuff, but you asked the question. So to get back to the question, I think it is disingenuous, and I think it is cowardly for those people to point at one person and say it's all because of him, because that is a total freaking lie. That is nothing but a political statement, and that's it. It has nothing to do with the criminal justice system. It has to do with the way it's applied in San Francisco, California. And they just ran out the DA. They had the one guy, the DA, that they just recalled. So I don't know if I guess they've replaced it with a little bit better one, because this guy is at least going to prosecute some people. But San Francisco, LA, you pick them out. They've had all sorts of problems with their DAs because they get these George Soros funded DAs in there that are all about destroying the criminal justice system. and it's all about protecting the criminals and not the victims. And
I had asked
that's the
Phil,
way it is.
and now we will slide away from politics. I spent too many years covering politics, and
Yeah.
I've learned to avoid it at all costs. So Abby Teja, who is Phil's wannabe adopted daughter, I think, and I'm glad you brought this up, Abby, because I'm a weird person. I think about this show a lot, and I woke up in the middle of the night last night, and I thought the same thing you're asking here. The question for this show today is Lori Vallow Daybell becoming unhinged, and she said, I think the question should be, is Lori Vallow Daybell becoming more unhinged? And I'm going to change it to that right after this show, because you're right, she was unhinged ahead of time. But I err sometimes, so I'm glad you brought that up. Meanwhile, Fort Lauderdale, I don't know if you guys saw the photos, just 25 minutes to the north of where I'm sitting. It was a 1,000-year flood. They're still underwater there. They had to shut the airport down. There was a thunderstorm cell that didn't move for 24 hours. It sat over Fort Lauderdale, and the pictures are unreal. I actually put a bunch up on my Instagram page at Surviving the Survivor. If you guys are bored and want to look at them, there's a lot of wild video from that. I keep Fridays are weird. We have fun Fridays. There's a Mark Pomeropoulos, a CIA guy, me, him, and Matt Kaufman, when we were about 7 years old, were having a catch with a baseball in front of Matt Kaufman's house. And Matt Kaufman's dad came out 5 times and said, do not throw the baseball here. Do not throw the baseball here, because he had a brand new car in the driveway, and we didn't listen. And then Mark threw the ball over Matt's head, and the ball landed on Matt Kaufman's father's brand new windshield, and the windshield shattered into 1,000 pieces. Now just imagine if your dad was Detective Fil Waters and that happened. I'm going to have to get your son on the show, Phil. Oh, and right here, I think I asked this last week. Kevin Callahan says, hi, Joel. Sorry again on your dad's passing. Thank you very much. Could you ask Scott? I think I asked him last week, and we're going to get to this in a moment. Have you ever investigated any of these cults? I think your answer was you didn't directly. Is that right, Scott? We're talking about Lori Vallow now.
Yeah, correct. I was, especially in my area in Delaware, I didn't really have any chance to be involved in any cult investigations. I would hear them in education trainings, scenarios, and some colleagues of mine, but nothing that I had any real direct interaction.
Sensory combustion. Shoo, I made it. Need my fill. And Scott, of course. Scott, back to you. There was a story, and this is not a News Nation story. And finally, the evildoer news has subsided. There's really not much out there, but just this one tidbit that I wanted to get your take on. And it says that Koberger's lawyers may have already scored a big win. Prosecutors recently disclosed in court documents that a police officer involved in the quadruple murder case is now the subject of an internal affairs probe, saying that any alleged impropriety on the part of investigators could threaten the trial. Is this problematic? Could this be a big deal that one of the investigators is under some sort of internal affairs probe?
No, and if I could, my guess is that there's a timeline of when information is shared, right, between prosecution, defense, and vice versa. And one of the prosecution, and I'll speak from a federal side, is this thing called Giglio. So if I was a lead investigator on a case or a witness or something of mine was going to come to light, naturally the prosecutor would go for all the law enforcement witnesses and write a letter to the department heads for their internal affairs file. That internal affairs file would be reviewed by specific individuals within the department, and then weigh what is going to be shared with the prosecutor. And so ultimately, if there was something, for example, as a police officer and as an FBI agent, I was involved in more car accidents than I want to confess to. But a car accident is a car accident, whether it's the fault of the driver or not, and that becomes that goes into your file as something that could be shared with defense if it felt appropriate. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's negative, right? It could be that, hey, out of the, let's just say it's 25 investigators in the many states that are involved, all their internal affairs files are going to be shared appropriately with the prosecution, and the prosecution is going to review those and make a decision whether or not it's something that's hey, that could be something that could weigh on whether or not we put this witness forward or not. Either way, that information may get shared with the defense, and the defense is going through all the files, looking for the something negative, something that they can splash. So I don't take that as really anything negative at this juncture. It could be absolutely nothing, but it will show as an internal affairs file. And when the information is not disclosed, it sounds bad. So it could be some very innocuous. But at the same time, it could be something that if a police officer who's going to testify had been convicted of lying in the past and had not been terminated, will that be shared? Absolutely, will be shared, and the prosecution will have to weigh whether or not to introduce that officer in the courtroom.
And let's hope he wasn't taking home the knife sheath to show friends, for example. But Phil, is this much ado about nothing, or is this something to worry about?
Well, Joe, I got to be honest with you. I don't even remember what the question was.
It's Friday, everyone. The question was, there's some sort of internal.
Scott covered it miraculous. I just don't remember what the question was.
Well, there's an internal affairs investigation going on with one of the officers who investigated the evildoers' quadruple homicide.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. So is that a big deal or not?
Well, I guess my take on it would be you've got to determine whether it had any effect on the investigation. Period. I mean,
that's it.
That would be the only thing to look into. Now, if this person's had other problems, has a history of this kind of stuff, then that could be a bigger issue, of course. But I think it's got to be specific to this particular case, and is there anything in there that might compromise?
Jen Till writes, yeah, I adore Phil, but I would hate to be at his house with my hand in the cookie jar when he walks in the room. I would feel so bad for being bad. His perps must get a conscience after chats, followed by his adopted daughter who says, maybe I don't want Phil to adopt me anymore. Followed by, this is a sweet comment from Helene O'Cleary. Love your name, Surviving the Survivor. I think you said your mom is a survivor from the evil concentration camps of the Nazis. Yes, she wasn't in a camp, but she was hidden. And bless her. And then we've got, look at this, a lovely little super sticker from Curiosity Killed the Cat. So the main topic of the day, which we are just getting to at the 43-minute mark. And by the way, Michelle from South Africa is in the house. Is obviously Lori Vallow Daybell, who's got some issues. Well, her former best friend, was on the stand yesterday. And prior to that, there was investigators on the stand. And there's no better people to ask questions about investigators to than Scott and Phil, which I'll get to in a moment. But they were speaking to her best friend yesterday, Scott. And Lori Vallow's brother, Alex, died of quote unquote natural causes mysteriously after all these deaths. And there are questions out there of whether it was natural or not. But the best friend was asked, how did they react? And they said that they prayed for him. And this was the prayer that Chad said for Alex Cox. You have already assisted us in ways that can never be repaid. And you will continue to do so as you move forward in this life. You will know when it is time to move to the other side. The best friend went on to say things like, she would tell me Lori would say things like, "I love Satan." She told me he would climb up. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the little boy. This is her little boy. The best friend said that Lori thought her little boy was possessed, and he would say things like, "I love Satan," and he would climb up on the refrigerator and go on top of the cabinets. It felt very unusual, this friend said, but it felt very innocent to me. All around, this is odd behavior. As an investigator, how do you decipher this? Is this just a crazy person talking? Or is this someone with ulterior motives who wants to kill her kid so she can go live with the love of her life?
It could be all the above, right?
By the way, Scott seems like just the nicest. I have to agree with that. But go on, Scott.
Can I just enjoy that for a second? No. Yeah. The obviously she's in trial, and she's in trial for her life, and so there are lots of things that she's going to be pulling stops out, like any defendant, and any good attorney is going to be looking through what they could use in order to defend them, and it's classic deflection. There's nothing to see here, and other people are the problems, and perhaps there really was aliens that had possessed their children and so forth. So there's a lot. Yes, there is a lot of talk that just seems really out there. Whatever word you want to use just sounds appropriate, and it is really amazing. And people seem just like the Murdaugh family. There seems to be lots of people who have just fallen ill and have died. And in and of itself, in a vacuum, they just seem like, okay, natural causes, whatever have you. But then, of course, when you start to investigate one homicide, how could you not look and resurface all of the other deaths that might have been classified as either accidental or natural causes, and look at them a little bit deeper? So with regards to this, Lori Daybell, she's defending her life, and for a mother to take the lives of her children is a very, very serious and almost incomprehensible act to do. And how do you portray your client before a jury and try to get a little bit of sympathy? Throw it on the devil, throw it on an alien, throw it on anything else, make that child, who is an innocent child, out to be something that is not innocent, right? And so project, deflect, and make the victim the bad guy.
Cami Huis. No idea how to say that last name. I broke down and bought a minivan a few years ago, and when I drove it to the elementary school parking lot, one young boy said it was his dream car. Let me tell you something. I live in Miami, just mere minutes from South Beach, the land of Lambos and Ferraris, which is what Phil drives. And my kid's minivan is the envy of all first and third graders. They think it's the coolest car in the world, the black on black.
I will tell you that boy that's just an indicator of further problems.
Judy says, so great to catch a live watching from South Africa, followed by minivans are so useful. Got a lot of women on watching here, and they've got my back, Phil. They've got
my gosh.
I'm gonna send you a picture.
You'll notice here that it's all women, Joel.
Yeah.
So and I'm glad to see that you're not exuding toxic masculinity. So no. you've relinquished that, and now you have the full support of all these women driving minivans. So and I'm sure this is going to, so this will cause all sorts of comments, and that's fine. I can handle it, no problem. I'm sorry. I'm just I'm not a minivan guy.
This is a rhetorical question, Phil. I don't actually want you to answer this. Irish McClass says, so you're saying that San Francisco isn't a destination city anymore, Phil? You can answer that if you want, followed by...
Well, the answer is yeah. I mean, and thank the Lord, my wife or my daughter has moved across the bay to Piedmont, and we don't have to go to San Francisco anymore to visit. So yeah, we go to Piedmont.
So Phil, moving along here. This best friend, Melanie Gibb, on the stand yesterday said that Lori Vallow, her former best friend, told her that she and Chad Daybell believed that their spouses were going to die, and then they could be together. Still, Tammy Daybell, the wife of Chad Daybell, was getting suspicious and went on to say that people who challenged them became dark spirits. The former nephew, she said to her best friend, was supposedly part of Hitler's group during that regime. It just evolved like that, Lori Vallow told her best friend. They believed in lives and afterlives, and she did not like this former nephew and said he was part of the Nazi party. Same question to you as I just asked Scott Duffey. Does this woman, in your opinion, with many years understanding and deciphering human nature, is this woman bat you know what crazy, or does she really believe these things, do you think?
Well, I think Scott's used the term, it's a combination of both. It's all those things. She's crazy, but she's not insane, and there is a difference. And so she's nuttier than an outhouse rat. I mean, she's obviously all those things, but her nuttiness comes up, and that's a technical term, by the way, that we used. Her nuttiness is something that's been manifested through her cult-like beliefs. So when she gets with him, and he's a nut. So he's writing these books. He's writing science fiction books. He's writing books, apocalyptic stuff. He's writing books about all of his near-death experiences. And so he's a person like her. That's the audience he is appealing to. Now, she just happens to be attractive and so forth. And she gets in with his group, and I'm sure he's eating up the ego charge that he's getting from her. So now he's smitten with her, obsessed with her, she with him. Now we got to get rid of the distractions in our lives that are keeping us from being just one item together without all these other things. So that would include his wife and her children. And I mean, look, this woman's been married, 5 times, I think?
5 times.
At the end of this thing. And then she had adopted the little boy who was on the autism spectrum in some way. A lot of challenges with that kind of stuff. I think she just got to the point where she's always been, like most people are, but she on steroids, always focused on what she wants for her in that moment. And then she's involved in this cult religious stuff. So we start to form our persona and who we are with all of those factors involved. And she turns out to be, she's going to be doing what she needs to do, supported by, I think the question has been asked about who influenced who. And I think this was kind of a mutual admiration society. I think they fueled each other. And it just goes to show you there's somebody for everyone. And these two together and just fanned the flames of whatever they were caught up in terms of the religious stuff. And then we need to be happy. And and all these crazy things about zombies and all this stuff. So we got to get rid of those things in our lives, in their minds, that are distractions from what we have going on together. And that's what brings about somebody that does something so depraved and so evil as to, I was reading the stuff in the court that's being presented, of course, the state that they found the children's bodies in.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's beyond comprehension that someone can do this to children, period, let alone do it to your own children, and then have this other idiot that's involved in it I think he's got 5 or 6 children himself.
Mm-hmm. They're adults.
It's just the depths of evil that went together in this particular investigation, in this particular incident, are unexplainable. You cannot even, I can't. And I've seen more dead bodies than anybody should ever see in every kind of situation, in all levels of, to use the term, all levels of evil and that kind of thing. But this is one of these that, if I were the one investigating this would be one of these investigations that would stick to me, because involving these children and just the depth to which these two individuals sunk to. I mean, look, they went into the depths of hell to pull this stuff out. This is atrocious. I mean, there aren't a word. I'm not a guy that's lost for words, but in this particular deal, after reading the details, I'm at a loss for words to even try to describe this.
Does it even matter to you whether or not she was crazy or not?
I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I think that's just a part of the bigger feature about her. But trust me, all of this stuff was planned. It was executed. The cover-up was put in place, all to get them where they wanted to be. So in terms of trying to claim that this was a moment of insanity, like I said, she's crazy, but she's not insane. And it's just a part of the big picture, just a part of the picture.
Special hello to Amy Lawrence Lovely. She was on our podcast last night, one of the better criminal defense attorneys in the Palmetto State, South Carolina. We talked Alec Murdoch. We had Eric Bland on last night, and we talked about getting justice for Stephen Smith, who was killed in what was then described as a hit and run in 2015, and has now been declared a murder, and they are working to get justice in that case. There were 2 persons of interest named in early April, late March, but there's been no movement as far as we know regarding those 2 individuals. Elf Scott writes, if I was on that jury, I'd be thinking Lori has to be mentally ill. Not sure what her actual mental health history has been. Does she have a diagnosis? I don't know if she has a diagnosis, but I do know she was in a psych hospital. Just to give a little more context here, Scott, before we get to this question or this comment, just before JJ, he's the little 7-year-old boy that was on the autism spectrum. The best friend says just before he was killed, she, meaning Lori, indicated that JJ was difficult to handle, and it was so hard for her to do that and be with Chad. And that her relationship with Chad Daybell distracted her to the point where she couldn't care for her son as much. This sounds like what I would call technically as a horrible mother, Scott, where she was swept away by some wackadoodle guy and ultimately chose, it appears, to kill her adopted son here, who had issues and was obviously just an innocent young boy. hoping to be cared for, but was ultimately he met his demise in the worst of ways. But if you were sitting on this jury and you took your investigator hat off, do you think you'd be thinking she's mentally ill? And by the way, there is no insanity defense in Idaho, but I don't know. What would you be thinking at this point, Scott, is my bottom line question.
Yeah, and I think so. As a jury, and I had been on a jury once. You're not to leave behind what you are. So that whether you're in professional life, investigative life, whatever it is, you're bringing your experiences to the table, and you're coming in with an open mind and listening to the evidence as is. So, from everything I've been reading, listening to, speculating about, I mean, it doesn't seem like this is not a whodunit. This is not, hey, somebody else did it and it's a cover. They're framing us. This is between two individuals who, just like looking at a suspect, you look at their body language, you look at what they're about, what they're saying versus what their body's giving off, and there's plenty of evidence showing these two, just living a great, happy, ever-go-lucky life, smiling and walking with flip-flops and going to the beach and shopping. And are those aspects of a crazy person, of a mentally ill individual, somebody who doesn't know what they've done is horribly wrong? So as a jury member, you get to see everything before you, and the prosecution is going to provide all that, and all this other speculation is going to be outside the jury. But the pictures, whether it be on social media or their own pictures, are going to be used against them. And ultimately, look at these two individuals. They got rid of everybody in their life that was an obstacle for them to live the type of life they want now. So, even if she's diagnosed with whatever she's been diagnosed with, um, is she ultimately responsible for killing two innocent and perhaps others? It's I think the jury can weigh it and say there may be issues, but this person does know what they did. It's not like they crawled into a corner and said, "Come get me." They went through elaborate, um, after the fact of cover up, and to hide their tracks as best as they could. So I think the jury will be able to see through all that, even if they feel sorry and say there's some sort of mental hiccup there. I think they'll be able to say justice will be served and do the right thing.
And by the way, the best friend, Melanie Gibb, said that Lori had told her and Chad had told her that they had both been married to each other many times in previous lives, for those who are wondering. Emma O'Hara.
Well, can I say something here about
Phil,
that?
you can always say something.
Well, number one, she's been found competent
Correct.
to stand trial.
Correct.
And number two, mental illness does not remove culpability or responsibility for what they did. So in this particular case, whatever she was thinking in her head, like Scott's alluded to, this was a planned event. This is something that had been going on for a while. And what their mission was between the two of them was to remove from their lives any distractions. And those two children were distractions. Now, my wife has worked with autistic children for 40 plus years, and they are a challenge. They are a challenge. So that type of stuff that she is saying, that's true. But she had neither the ability nor the desire to take care of that child, knowing that those challenges were there. She adopted this little boy. So, or Vallow did. So it was, there are no excuses looking at the evidence that they've already shown there are no excuses that the defense is going to be able to present that's going to justify what she did to those children. None.
Well said, Phil. Emma O'Hara, watching from Dublin, Ireland. Great coverage as always. Happy Friday. It is the Global Friday show. We've got people from everywhere. Lindsay Jane, I bring this up for a reason, and so does she. Lori should have Tylee and JJ's autopsy pictures taped to her wall to remind her every day of the sickening, egregious state of what she's done. And Phil, I wanted your take and Scott's take on this. This happened a couple of days ago. There was a literal meltdown in court. They had the investigators. They had the Fil and Scotts in the courtroom early in the day.
Yeah.
And they went through the details of finding these bodies. And then in the afternoon, after seeing all these photos, Lori enters the courtroom. Her face is red, and she appears to have been crying. The deputy, as she is crying, is locking her leg shackles into the ground. Her mood is visibly different. Or earlier in the day, she was chatting with her attorney, smiling and laughing. And then the defense attorney, a guy named Jim Archibald, comes out and says to the court that Lori wishes to waive her right to not be present for the remainder of the afternoon. She basically wanted to run back to her jail cell so she wouldn't have to see these photos and listen to the testimony. And the judge took a stance and said, absolutely not. You've got to be here. Was that the right move, Phil?
And I'll use the LY word, absolutely. That little display of emotion and so forth and so on, if that is one of those moments where she has had to look at the results of her actions, and that was to coin a phrase, that was a come to Jesus moment for her. And that was her response to it. And now she doesn't have the character to sit there and face what she did. That judge made the absolute right call. You know what? You are alleged, you are charged to have done these things to your children. And by golly, just because now it's finally being driven home to you because you're now seeing the result of what you did, and it upsets you, well, then the question is going to be, in what way is she upset? Is she upset because now she's actually seeing the results, or is she upset because she got caught because now she's seeing the results? So whichever way it is, the judge made the absolute right call to hold her responsible, make her sit in that courtroom, and you're going to see exactly what you did. Look, she's wanting him to show her the compassion that she sorely lacked with her children. And I think he's made the right call. I think this is a moment where he is going to bring her home to the reality of what she's charged with and to see what the results were. So good for the judge. Good for the judge.
And Scott, so the judge made that decision at 2 p.m. almost on Tuesday. And immediately after that, Lori basically glared at him. And a mere hour later, people looked over and she was reported to be asleep. It appears that she was given some sort of cocktail of psychotropics. Later on, they reported that some said she was not asleep, that she just likes to sit with her eyes closed, ruminating. But what about this tantrum and courtroom tantrum, and then, basically being told to sit down and look at your handiwork in essence?
Yeah, so I saw Phil jumping up, and I want to see if we were on the same point. That let's just say she fell asleep. That is an absolute sign of a guilty person who has relented and has said, "You got me." And so I think
Bingo.
we
Exactly.
were on target there, Phil. I
Yeah,
saw,
we were thinking the same thing, Scott. That's awesome. Yeah, you're exactly
and
right.
so absolutely. And if I could back up a second, I totally agree that this judge made a great decision, and let me say why as well. Those jury men and women, doing their service, right? Busy lives, and now, yes, a great service to be able to sit on a jury, but they don't have the option to not look hard at those pictures. Um, so you have two individuals that are charged with a horrible crime, and then of course to run away from it. But investigators, so that brings the investigators now to a crime scene to painstakingly undo to put together a picture, so to speak, knowing that this is going to go to a courtroom before a jury and the judge. And so every evidence technician, every police officer, every investigator, whether you have children or not, any time that you have to see that, you're putting it away for your own mental health, but it forever remains with you. And now imagine a jury who did not buy into this, who are not paid to go to crime scenes, who are not trained to go to crime scenes, and now have to live forever with those impressions in their mind through their dreams. They're never going to unsee it. And so kudos to that judge to say, if the jury cannot be excused, absolutely the one who is being charged with this horrific crime is not going to be excused. And then so whatever temper tantrums, whatever, drugs, whatever sleep, whatever, it ultimately comes down to that this person realizes they are now seeing what that their handiwork, and they shouldn't be shielded from it.
Real quick, Andy School here writes, do you fellows believe she'll lean in to what has worked for her in her life during this case? We see she knows when she's being watched, always saw the camera when it was on her. Do you guys feel she's planning antics? I got that sense, to be totally honest and transparent, when this was happening, that she's sort of positioning herself to be deemed insane, even though it doesn't matter in the state of Idaho. Do you think she's planning any of this, Scott?
Oh yeah, it's plays right into what has been, especially what the prosecution's putting forward. I mean, there's a lot of incomprehensible stories of whatever she's putting out there with regards to her children and the reason for taking them off this earth. And so now she's in a fight for her life, and she's going to play it right to the very end. And but the jury will see through that. I don't think it plays well for her. It's to it's one thing to do something, and then another thing to see exactly what you have done and what's going to be the look on your face. Horror, absolute regret, absolute mea culpa. You know, an individual can see that, and or is she going to play right through this where nonchalantly fall asleep, act a little crazy, perhaps whatever it is, as opposed to um, a mother who would go to the ends of the earth to protect the child. Um, and people can see that. They know what that looks like on a face, as opposed to someone who doesn't care. And so did you do this cold-heartedly? And are you really that cold? Or are you forever sorry and regretful? So these antics, I think, are not playing well for her.
Diagnosis is evil. Now, this next part is I want to get to it because I'm very interested to see what Fil and Scott have to say because this is their lives. But this is difficult to listen to, and Phil alluded to it. But the investigator, Detective Ray Hermosillo, out of Rexburg, Idaho, took the stand a day ago, and he was on for a day and a half, basically. And he talks about finding JJ. So if this bothers you, I would tune out right now. But 2:30, 2:23, he says, I saw a little boy in red pajamas. He had a white plastic bag around his head, several layers of duct tape from his chin to his forehead area. His arms were duct taped with several layers of duct tape. His arms were folded across his chest. His feet were also duct taped and bound. He had a white and blue child's blanket placed on top of him. And then went on to say that his pajamas were soaked with body decomposition. He still had on his pull-up nighttime diaper, which my 3-year-old still wears. There was some visible bruising on his arms that the medical examiner had pointed us to. And this is obviously brutal to hear. But Phil, I remember you've seen everything, but I remember you telling me one time that the toughest thing for you was seeing young children and babies. Um, as a seasoned investigator, um, I mean, how do you describe this to STS Nation? What is it like for an investigator to come on a scene like this and live through this and see these images in 3 dimensions, the smell, the sights? What is that like? Is there any way to convey that?
Well, for me, it was because I'm grounded in my faith that I was able to handle the things that I was seeing. But to this kind of a specific event, I can tell you that that detective, and I've had a similar event I think I've described on here before. That detective will never forget what he saw, ever. And at the time, at that moment, I'll speak from my own experience, that the detective has to compartmentalize what he is seeing because we're in the throes and the midst of that investigation. And that's what we need to be concentrating on. What we are seeing is what we are noting, what we're writing down that is going to further getting to the truth of the investigation. So that's how I handle it. I would imagine that's how this detective is handling this, is that you have to put on an armor that allows you to see through the horror of what you're looking at in order to get to the evidence that leads you to the truth about what happened.
Chrissy writes, I feel for the jurors. They must be constantly pinching themselves that this batshit crazy stuff is real indeed. Followed by Patty Martin. Lori doesn't need an attorney. She needs an exorcist. Scott, I know you're working gangs and stuff. Did you have the unfortunate experience of uh, being at crime scenes with young children, and what kind of impact did that have on you, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, anytime a child is involved in it's just, I would say, like Phil, you need an absolute faith that you're there for a reason. You're a part of now putting together the pieces for justice to be served. And as a young police officer, one of my early cases was, hey, rookie, go and to an autopsy, and of course you're being prepped, and it was a murder suicide. Right, father murders his young son, and then commits suicide. So I am there as a police officer to sit in on one of my first autopsies, and I will. I'm not embarrassed to say that I was visibly shaken. It's something you never imagine, even though kind of expect you're going to see at some point in your career, but early in my career. But it was something that I said a prayer beforehand. Hey, I'm here for a reason. Let me do my job. Let me not. You you want to be. You're tempted to look away. You don't need to. No, I needed to absolutely see every aspect. That's my job, and to articulate and to record that by taking the pictures, etc. And yet it's very difficult to not think of yourself as what was this father thinking, what was this child thinking during, you're thinking everything else that's naturally human, um to think prior to this horrible action. And then when it's but so part of it is, okay, this is a moment in time where I have to step out of my uh, reality, so to speak, and just think of this as a pure science project that needs to be completed, and it needs my wholeness to my eyes, my ears, and now I'm going to write the reports and do it in such a way that is going to be presented to a prosecutor who's going to say, because of that work, I now can go and do my job. And that's ultimately was a learning experience for me, that anybody that I was going to see, um, who is now the victim of a homicide, um, and to do my job, to put it forth, and then to be able to go back to the family members and ultimately be able to hug somebody, and to try to give them a little bit, um, of hope, but then at the same time, that extra hug giving me hope as an investigator to say, okay, now how can I do the same, if not better, because it's going to happen again. And so anytime you see a child, and I have seen quite some in my lifetime as an FBI agent and whatnot, and it never gets easier, but I think my faith and my ultimately knowing what my task is, that put it together so a prosecutor can put forth a great prosecution to make sure that justice is served and the truth has been made known, so there's no questions later on.
And I think we all owe a, big thanks to both Scott and Phil because they took an oath to protect and serve, and that is what they did. And it is not an easy job, and people are quick to jump on law enforcement. This is the flip side of that. It is not an easy job, and all first responders have a very hard job. So kudos to these guys. Phil and Scott will wrap up in a moment here. What kind of help do police get? You can't unsee these things. And is it mandatory? Is it trauma? She's a trauma nurse, I guess. We would go meet with a therapist. What kind of services are offered by the Houston PD, Phil, if you see something that is difficult to see?
We have a division, psychological services, that is committed to police officers at HPD that might feel a need to speak with someone about something that they've seen or heard or experienced that has affected them in a way that they need to get it out, express it, and just have an open ear to listen to them and try to get them past the trauma of whatever it was that they experienced.
Scott, how do you see so much horror and not become jaded? Carrie wants to know.
Mm.
And Sensory Combustion says this is riveting, which I agree with. But
Yeah, faith. It's camaraderie. Having been both a local police officer and an FBI agent. The FBI has a fantastic system in place. They have it at the highest levels in headquarters, and then for each and every division within the FBI has a great EAP system in place. And so
what's EAP?
EAP is the oh gosh, I don't know. It's employee assistance program. You know, you just say at these acronyms and you just take them for granted. But it is your peers who go through this special training, and ultimately they're always making themselves available to any employee at any time, at any stage of their life, personal, professional, who just need to reach out to know that there is someone who's simply going to provide a non-judgmental ear, but at the same time be able to direct if an employee so needed it. But ultimately, it's just being able to speak with your fellow investigators who were there with you at one crime scene or another, and however you share that, even if it's not so much in word, but simply a nod, or somebody who notices something in you that you're not your typical self, and they're like, hey, just to reach out to you to say, hey, if there's something you need to talk about, I'm here. So I just always felt like good friends, good camaraderie, and so we were able to um, be able to get through one thing or the next, and ultimately, it's seeing someone who is able to not only return home safely, right at the end of a shift, but at the same time, good family support that says, okay, we got your back now that you're home, and anything that you need to get through to either discuss or simply to go on vacation or to head out, or, just simply do nothing. It's ultimately a support mechanism, and I believe both professionally and personally, I've put those things in place, and got me to here today.
Very well said. As my 3 kids who are still on spring break just entered the home. Gentil writes, Scott is a brilliant, gentle soul. Thankfully, I'm moving into my studio in the next week or two. Kevin says this very well. Heartbreaking kids are the only pure innocence left in this world that we have. They must be protected from these evil people, right? As I'm bashing my own children. But I do love my kids, even if when they do graffiti my minivan. Final moments. We went dark and deep in the last few minutes of the show, but Scott Duffey, the voice of reason, the gentle soul, the man with the soul patch. He is a retired FBI agent out of Delaware. 20 years. He worked bank robberies, fugitive task force cases. 5.5 years before that, he was 4 or 5.5 years a Pennsylvania police officer. Scott, would you ever have used a minivan? Did you say you had one?
I did. I had a Nissan Quest. It was short-lived, but I did have it, and I wanted to ask this from the beginning, so I'm going to ask it of Fil now. If Ferrari made a minivan, would you have purchased one?
And by the way, I know the answer to this before Fil answers because I live in Miami. They make these horrible-looking. They're like a Ferrari. It's not an SUV. It's almost, I don't know. It's like a weird, it's got a hatchback and it's hideous. Who the hell would buy that? But Fil, go on.
Well, Ferrari has come out with, they're not calling it an SUV, but it's a 4-door Ferrari. It's the first one they've ever made, and they are freaking awesome.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they are beautiful. It is unbelievable. But to answer the direct question here, Scott, if you ever see me in a minivan, you need to first check my pulse because I'm probably dead and somebody planted me in there. And I'm not disparaging those that have gone the minivan route. So I'm just saying, for me, that world of possibility was non-existent. Scott, I am a little disappointed to hear that you gave in, and
I did give in. Having 4 very young in age, so I'll give you their ages right now, in case somebody.
I know all. I've heard all the excuses. I know.
At one time, they were all under 5.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's just life, brother. There's just certain things you cannot compromise. But
by the way, Fil, your adopted daughter, Abby, who's now up in the air about whether you should adopt or not, says, Joel, the email, she wants to send fan art. I love that. Fan art. You can send it to Surviving the Survivor at gmail.com. Hopefully it has Phil sitting in a Ferrari with a Hawaiian shirt on there.
Well,
By the way,
I'm certainly sorry that she's had to rethink that, but in the words of that great philosopher, Popeye, I am what I am.
I love Popeye. I feel like Popeye's almost forgotten at this point.
Well, he's toxic masculinity, so
he is. I gotta feed my son some spinach right now. By the way, Phil, I don't know if you're watching, but all through the scroll, one after another, were saying that they all had a Chevy Astro minivan. So I feel supported here.
I had 2 Chevrolet Corvettes.
I love it. The new one's actually kind of nice, but for those who don't know already, you're looking at America's most respected detective. 23 years. I gave him that title, by the way, and America's most respected detective. 23 years as a Houston PD homicide detective, investigated over 400 homicide cases. If you think your spouse is, I don't know, up to no good, call Phil. He's the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations. He also starred in the show The Interrogator, and he's done it all. He's got grandkids that he lets his kids deal with, not himself. Phil, any final thoughts on this beautiful Friday?
Well, we cover a lot of stuff on these shows, and I've seen some of the haters that will put in here that they don't want us talking about ringtones, and they don't want us talking about my shirts, and they don't want us talking about other things. Look, folks, if there wasn't a little bit of levity along with the seriousness of what we talk about every week, all 3 of us would be going crazy. So my parting comment will be to those that think we've got to be serious all the time. And that's the bigger problem. That's one of the bigger problems, right? Everybody's lost their sense of humor. So I would just say this in a few words, just lighten up, Francis.
I love it. Gentile says, I'm a Mustang girl, followed by Laura Waldy. Phil, I'm a girl and I drive a Shelby Mustang. No minivan for this lady.
Good for her. Way to go, Laura.
By your daughter, who says, well said, Phil. Humor is a must. Quick programming note. This Sunday night, this lady makes her comeback. We are going to be speaking to, this is interesting, 3 female ex-cons about what life is like behind bars in that Ada County jail and what it might be like for her for the rest of her life in prison. So 3 female ex-cons being interviewed by my mother, who towed the line between a life of crime and a life of innocence, my mother. And she managed to stay on the right side of things. That was a joke, by the way. Teresa writes, Corvettes are beautiful. Fridays, I have to say, my favorite show. As Phil says, Julie says here, great show. Joel, thank you. It's my favorite show. I get to hang out with 2 of the coolest guys. Did a very difficult job for their careers and ask them dumb questions from me and smart ones from you and get cool answers. So until next Friday, we will do it again. Love you, America. We don't like that traitor, the 21-year-old guy, but we love America. We love Delaware, and we love Houston, Wilmington, and Houston. So until next time, all.